They say a picture's worth 1,000 words unless it's unrecognizable in business. On this episode, we'll talk with entrepreneurs all over New England about marketing, logos, relaunches, and tweaking their brands for growth.
Branding for success. This is the language of business with Greg Stoller.
When you need emergency medical care, seconds count, and computer access to your health records shouldn't stand in the way. John Gobron is the president and CEO of Aventura Computing. And John, welcome to the language of business.
Thank you, Greg. It's good to be here.
How long have you been CEO?
About a year and a half.
Is your positioning in the company to change the branding, or is that happening before you arrived?
That was part of what I brought along.
With Aventura going through its strategic rebranding, how are you going about it?
A number of ways. Really, there's no singular way to rebrand, I don't think. We have added awareness computing to our name. It used to just be Aventura. Now it's Aventura Awareness Computing. The phrase awareness computing, we try to work into everything. It's, you call it our tagline.
What does that mean?
So you think of computers, they're kind of dumb instruments. They don't know anything until you tell them what to do. So what Aventura does is we bring awareness to the computing experience. And we bring that into healthcare. Doctors and nurses have to use computers. Oftentimes time matters, seconds matter. And the effort in logging on and deciding what applications you need and what patient you need to be charting in can take a long time. We make that happen instantly.
And what does that mean in English, though?
In English means if I'm a physician and I'm treating you as a patient and I say, well, Greg, it's good to see you today. I don't want to be doing this all day. I want to be doing this all day. I want to be talking to you. I want to find out what's wrong. I want to be helping you. I want to be doing what I'm trained to do. And when I'm documenting that stuff, which is a very important part of healthcare, the documentation, the electronic medical record is really, all the government legislation is designed so that your records can be shared, that if you go from place to place, everyone has your information, your correct information, accurate information. Good things happen when it's in the computer, but it's hard for doctors and nurses to use the computer in the first place. So we make that easier.
What is Aventura's business strategy right now?
So our business strategy right now, in a nutshell, is to own the clinical desktop. And that as our technology is a platform, and I can talk about that in a little bit, but from a strategy perspective, good things happen when we are authenticating the desktop and providing those applications at the point of care. There's a whole lot more we can do from there. So the beachhead, if you will, is gaining the ownership of the desktop and providing instant-on access to the desktop. And then as a platform, we can bring in things that we don't make, technologies like population health or predictive analytics that are really coming down, that there's a lot of hope that those will change the way healthcare is delivered. But they're going to have to be delivered at the point of care, and we want to be there for when the next greatest thing on the clinical desktop happens. It comes through an Aventura Aware platform.
Why are you rebranding now?
Like a lot of early technology companies, we had a great solution for a problem that was well known, but we didn't tell the story that well. In fact, when I joined Aventura, I went on what I call the 30-day listening tour, and I just walked around and told everybody I wasn't going to do anything for 30 days. I was just going to listen. And I talked to customers, I talked to employees, and one of the things that really came up a lot is when I asked how do you define what Aventura does? I joke, I talked to 30 people, I got 50 different answers. We needed a half hour and a whiteboard and a demo to describe what we did. So we rebranded into the concept of awareness computing, which really came from our customers, because I went out and asked them, how do you justify what we do? How do you tell your board, I'm going to spend this much money on this thing? What do you call it? And they were quite helpful in saying, well, we think of you as awareness. You bring awareness to the point of care.
What is the company's end goal then?
The end goal is to really provide awareness computing for as many hospitals as possible. And then it's highly likely that the workflow that we see in clinical healthcare also exists in other industries. So whenever you have a high amount of regulation, a high amount of mobility within a user base, our technology is a pretty good solution for that.
So is the rebranding more strategically oriented, or is it marketing oriented, or something else entirely?
I would say it's probably a combination of strategic and marketing. It's really, what do we call ourselves, what's going to resonate in the market, and how can we use a term or a phrase that people can understand, at least with a tiny amount of thought, that they can get it, and we can build on it from there.
So the technology isn't changing, but how you're positioning it or repositioning in the market is.
Exactly right. The fundamental technology hasn't changed. We've done some things to add it, augment it, make it better, but the core platform is exactly the same.
Who do you see from a branding perspective as your customers? The physicians, the nurses, or people in the CIO's office in the hospital?
Yes. Ultimately, our technology most benefits the clinicians at the point of care. So ultimately, those are our customers. In fact, when I talk to CIOs and even CEOs, they often use the word customer when they talk about doctors and nurses. They see themselves, IT infrastructure in particular, they see the doctors and nurses as their customers. They use the word a lot more now than they did 10 years ago. So when we talk to IT teams and CIOs, we're helping them, they're our customer, but we're helping them with their customer. So really the answer is both. Ultimately, if it doesn't benefit the technology, if it doesn't benefit the customer, nothing's going to happen. If it does, then good things will happen.
Do you think the average hospital would want to buy a more famous brand that they are familiar with, or your technology that's better?
You know, it's an interesting dilemma because from the fame of brand perspective, healthcare is quite cyclical. And right now there's a lot of spending going on in healthcare, and the big software firms are investing in their healthcare practices. But a lot of times, healthcare has a longer sales cycle. It's much like dealing with the government. And the time to sell and the margins aren't as good as they are in potentially other industries that spend more money in IT. So you see some big brands come in and after a little while come out. And they've done this regularly for the past 20 years. Whereas brands that are focused entirely on healthcare, and that's their core business, gain a lot of trust pretty rapidly because the end customers, the CIOs or the doctors, know that you're going to be in the business no matter what.
Beyond the tagline, would you ever consider changing your slogan, the company's name, etc.?
You know, I would never say no to anything. I don't really know, what the far-off future holds. This is working really well for us. It was an interesting internal debate as to how we best did this, because awareness computing is not something that you just go to the shelf and say, I want an awareness computing. People don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to buy an awareness computing today. So there's an element of education to it. But we felt like with the value we deliver and what exists in the space right now, we felt like we could create the space and then be the first to dominate it. And that's what we're doing.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
John Gobron, the president and CEO of Aventura Technology. What gets you to purchase a product more? Its logo or its brand? We'll find out next.
Coming up, you can hear it but not see it, yet it's part of our everyday life. But now, how the Zipcar puts something extra in the tank as the language of business continues.
Forget corporate strategy. For Melanie Lowe, business success is putting beauty into the eye of the beholder. She is the owner of M-Space Design. And Melanie, welcome to the Language of Business.
Thank you.
How much familiarity do you have to have with a company before you can comfortably redesign their logo?
Well, it depends if I'm doing just the logo or the whole brand identity, but you get to know them pretty well. You have to really find out some things about them. You don't have to know every detail, but you need the big picture of the brand. You have to know what they do, who they're talking to. You really have to get that brand, and you have to know their culture. Usually there's a visionary, usually marketing department or a CEO. They can tell you who they are, and it's usually enough to go on.
How much time do you spend studying your client's competition?
So whether it's a rebrand or a startup, I study the client's competition, their space. We want to know what it looks like, what's out there, so that you don't repeat it. So you're not doing something that's the same and you're not stepping on toes that are out there.
Is most of your work done for new brands or existing brands?
I do both. Some are startups, but a lot are later stages. And either way, they all need to make a change around their brand identity. An example of that would be Wayfair. They were known as CSN stores. They owned things like upholstery.com and bedroomfurniture.com, things like that. And they wanted to make one cohesive brand. So it was a challenge because they wanted to be everything home to everybody. It was a big idea. But what it came up with was 4 houses in different colors that came together forming one shape that looked like an open box. And that referred to their packaging, shipping aspect of an e-commerce business. And then we came up with color palettes and photography styles and web layouts, and worked with a wonderful writer who came up with their A Zillion Things Home, their tagline and voice, and just went on to develop further the brand identity.
What tends to come first, the brand personality or the strategic positioning behind it?
Both are intertwined. Really, you can't have one without the other. So in a case like Zipcar, for instance, there's the pragmatic reasons that they're there, which is they cars, wheels when you want them, transportation, and then there's the other ones like freedom and fun, and you really have to take all that into account when developing an ID for somebody. It's not just one or the other.
When you took them over, were they always Zipcar, or were they changing their name as well?
No, they were Zipcar. The brand that you see out there now is the original logo that's out there now is what I did. But at the time, they had something that existed. It just didn't read well on cars. A lot of times when I work in a rebranding project, there's an intrinsic problem with the ID that they have. So in this case, what they had didn't read. So I worked on helping them bringing that up.
When you design a brand, a lot of thought goes into the color, the logo, the font, etc. Do you think the average person gets 100% of it?
Oh, no. You have to explain it. I mean, when I have presentations, I go through and I explain absolutely everything they're looking at and why they're looking at it. And that's what's usually rooted in the strategy, because otherwise you will have people saying, I don't like green. Green means envy. Well, green can mean growth, and green can mean, good things. So people get caught up in little details, so you try to root it in the strategy in that case.
What happens when a client insists on a logo or a color scheme that you know isn't going to do well?
That does happen, because again, design's really personal. So sometimes there is a CEO that really will hate a certain color or like a certain color in particular. They don't comment on fonts quite as much, but color, yes. So in the Wayfair example that I mentioned, the founders really liked green and purple. And some attempts that had been made previously with bright green and purple were horrible. They were just, they vibrated together. So, I might take a little license. So in the case of their logo, I used a dark plum for purple and more of a mossy green. You had to tone them down so that it didn't vibrate. But sometimes if they're being insistent and it's really not working, oftentimes they will see that. Once they see it in use, you have to show them sort of the bad idea, and then you show them what your recommendation is.
How many of your clients actually use focus groups with their customers while you're involved with the process?
Focus groups are tough because everyone's a critic, and again, when it comes to design, we all think we're designers. We all think we can, oh yeah, that should be blue or green. Everybody's a critic. So focus groups for layouts, more layouts. I don't get it so much with logo design, but you'll get it with layouts, advertising, they get it a lot. People will criticize, and if you really want to go down to the common denominator, you're going to end up with a blue, because in the West, we like blue, a mid-range blue. In the East, it's red. So there's certain things that a lot of people in a room can agree on. You don't want design by committee. You will not get your best product.
What trends are you noticing in your business these days?
The funny thing with trends is that I find that when I present ideas to people, they say they want something new. They want to break new ground, and they always say they love Apple. But when they really see something new, it's uncomfortable. And somebody's comfortable choosing an idea that they've seen before, hence the trend. It might be something that's already out there. That feels comfortable. They're going to be able to sell that in to their president or whoever they have to much easier. Apple, when they named the company Apple, the landscape at the time was DEC, Compaq, really Microsoft, really computer names. People would have criticized the name Apple. That's a kid's store. That's a record company. I don't know if people get the courage that it took to go a different route.
How many of your clients really want to take a chance and be different?
They all say they do. But like I said before, it really takes courage. And the ones that actually do, they're confident in their decision making. My suggestion here would be hire a good designer. Hire somebody whose work you've seen and you like, and then trust them. Trust the process.
Thanks, Melanie.
Thank you.
Melanie Lowe, the owner of M-Space Design.
Coming up, how to brand a radio station as the language of business continues.
Travel is part of the American way of life.
When we're on vacation, we keep an eye out for anything that looks out of place.
Miss your bag.
When we travel from city to city, we pay attention to our surroundings.
Everyone plays a role in keeping our community safe.
Whether you're traveling for business or pleasure, be aware of your surroundings. If you see something suspicious, say something to local authorities.
This is the Language of Business with Greg Stoller.
You can hear it but not see it. Yet the sounds permeate nearly every aspect of our lives, from when we wake up to when we go to bed, in our car, home, and office. John Garabedian has been perfecting brands for well over 50 years in 150 markets across the United States. We're joining him today on Cape Cod, and welcome to the Language of Business.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So how did you get your first job at 17 years old being a DJ?
I went looking for it. I was a senior in high school. I took a couple days off and decided I wanted a job in radio. And I hopped in my car and drove around to every radio station within 50 miles of Boston and had a little tape I put together, and that's it. I got hired at this little station in Milford, Mass. to do Saturday and Sunday. And nothing changes but the date. I'm still doing Saturday.
You're, of course, referring to your nationwide show, Open House Party, which we'll get to later. But help our viewers to understand, how did you parlay a weekend job into eventually becoming a program director and then the owner of multiple radio stations?
You will go to work every day. I mean, that's what you do. You work at it. And I fell in love with radio at an early age.
So how do you connect a brand then to a radio station?
The way you brand anything. I mean, you first of all start with a name. The name has to be something that will be memorable. The name has to be something that reflects what the product is and appeals to the target user. And then you have to deliver the product, make sure the product suits the target audience, and then let people know about it.
Talk to us about Open House Party, which is broadcast over the weekend, nationwide distribution. How did you start it? How does that contribute to your own brand or the station's brands that it's broadcast on?
In great marketing and sales, you learn to solve problems. If you solve a problem for somebody, you put a price on it, and if it's reasonable, they'll pay the price to solve the problem. And the problem in radio was weekends sucked. Weekend radio programming was, 19-year-old kids who couldn't put two sentences together, just sounding crappy, and in most formats. So I happened to be at a party that Warner Brothers Records was having in Boston. All the usual characters were there, including Sonny Joe White from Kiss 108. So he approached me. He said, I've been meaning to give you a call. How'd you like to do a weekend show on Kiss 108 like you used to do on WBCN, which I had helped propel from the 1.5 share to a 9 share back in the early 80s. And I said, well, what do you need me for? I said, why don't you get some college kids? He said, well, that's what we have right now. He said, we have great ratings during the week, but on the weekends we really drop off. I said, well, I know what your problem is. You can't get good part-timers, because if they're part-timers and they get to be any good, someone hires them away full-time. He said, yeah. I said, we now have satellites. Why not produce a big national party show? People love parties. People work all week for their weekend. And on the weekend, they want to have fun and celebrate. He said, well, what would it be? I said, well, you have, first of all, superstar guests every week. You can promote it all week. Coming up this weekend, big name guest. You have a live studio audience. You have 800 lines so people can call in from all over the country. You have the interaction with the audience, which is fun and exciting. And of course, a superb party host, me. September 5th, 1987, we launched on KISS. And when the fall book came out, we had a 14.8 share on a 6-share radio station, which was not only the highest share for the week on KISS, but the highest share for any day part on any radio station in the Boston market.
We're joining you today on Cape Cod, your offices, which houses 4 radio stations. Why have you chosen to invest in radio stations right now?
One simple reason, because it's fun. I love radio. When Nassau Broadcasting went bankrupt, and they offered the Cape Cod cluster for sale, there were 2 stations, Pixie 103 and Frank FM. Pixie is the legendary heritage 25-year classic rock station on the Cape. It's a great station, well respected, well listened to. Frank FM is about 8 years old. It is a We Play Anything station, which was a sort of a fad format that came in 5 or 6, 7 years ago. Frank had 2 transmitters on 93.5 and 101.1. The reason for that was the 93.5 transmitter was, here's Cape Cod, Provincetown, Hyannis. The transmitter was out here and only was 3,000 watts and only got to about here. 101.1 was down here in Mashpee and only got to about here. So to cover the whole Cape, they put them together. Well, the problem, being an engineer was an advantage because having the 93.5 over here was stupid. Why did they have it down here? So we did some research and studying. We found a transmitter site that would work for the FCC to move, and we applied and got permission to move it closer to the Mid-Cape. So now 93.5 could become Frank FM on its own and carry the whole Cape. And then that freed up 101.1 for something else. Well, the biggest hole in radio on Cape Cod is top 40. So it was a natural. So what are we going to call it? We tried coming up with names, Hot, which I thought was kind of immature. Hot sounds like, oh, it's hot. It's Paris Hilton. But the name I thought just made sense is just put a letter with it. Y101. Why not? So we called it Y101. That's the brand. And then it came to 98.7. And I found out it was owned by a guy who lived up in Medfield. He'd bought it at an FCC auction, which is how they hand channels out these days. And we worked a deal out, and I bought it from him and put it on the air. And Steve McVie and I said, well, what do we program it with? And we instantly knew. 35% of the Cape population is over 60. And of the 356 cities and towns in Massachusetts, 5 of the 7 towns with the highest median age are in the Lower Cape. So, and that audience was underserved.
Are there any economies of scale by owning 4 stations together, or do they just happen?
Yeah. Absolutely. And because everything's automated today, you can have a very small staff and use voice tracking, which we pioneered back in the early 70s, to have announcers who, basically they do something else, but they do this.
Thank you, John. John Garabedian, radio station owner and on-air personality extraordinaire. Coming up, you should see what these folks consider business casual.
Coming up, how does your PR change as you build your brand as the language of business continues?
These garments save lives not only for the firefighters who wear them, but more importantly for those they rescue. This is what Globe Manufacturing does, but what does their brand stand for? We're here in Pittsfield, New Hampshire, talking with Rob Fries, who's a 4th-generation owner, and Don Fibbick of Kemp Goldberg Partners. Rob, tell us about what makes your company special.
It's a really special place because of our dedication to our customer. They really drive our business, and all of our employees really understand it. We're able to execute on those custom products that our customers depend on literally to bring them home at the end of the day and save lives.
Is all of your manufacturing done domestically?
All of our manufacturing is domestic. We're a 4th-generation family-owned business. We manufacture in 3 different states in the U.S., having about 425 employees in total, and about a little over 300 of those are right here in Pittsfield at the headquarters.
Are you one of Pittsfield's largest employers then?
We are. We employ about 10% of the overall population of the community, and we draw from the bedroom communities around Pittsfield, and we're kind of stacked here in the foothills of New Hampshire. A little known secret, I think, in American enterprise.
What do you want your employees to feel about your company?
I think they all get it. They all really understand who we are and what we're about. They're part of our culture, and that's part of our brand. The folks here understand that what they do matters. Every single person out here is a great salesman for our organization. They talk to our customers, and when they do, over 90% of the customers that come here to visit us in the factory buy our product because they understand what's behind that brand.
So what is that brand promise to your customers then?
The brand promise itself is really one of quality, performance, technology, and high levels of customization, and the people that stand behind it to deliver that.
Don, as a former firefighter yourself, what is one of the first things that went through your mind when you found out you were taking on the Globe account?
Well, it actually started before we found out we were going to have an opportunity to help to shape the brand. It's personal for me. I come from a family of firefighters. I was a firefighter, and coincidentally, we all wore Globe gear. The Globe name is it's absolutely an iconic name, certainly in the fire service, and to have the chance to work for a brand that's so iconic, that's so well known. And is doing such a good job and has done such a great job for so many years. You don't get those opportunities very often either. So,
Not being part of the family, how do you add value in the brand management category?
well, the perspective helps. Distance is not a bad thing. When we set out to shape brands, there's sort of a standard set of processes that we follow, and then it sort of goes out from there. First and foremost, we're curious about who we're talking to. We want to intimately understand our audience. In this case, we were talking to firefighters and the influencers of those departments, the guys that are on the gear committees that are making the decisions about what people are actually going to be wearing in those departments. We wanted to understand them intimately, but this is also, it's a product, so there's a sales force connected to this. We wanted to talk to them. We wanted to understand, what their needs were, how we could best help them, and I guess the end game of all this is that once we understand who we're talking to, then we know how to reach out to them. Then we know what the important messages are, what the important needs are, and what the right channels are to use to communicate to them. Ultimately, we talk about brands. You can make a promise about your brand and your product will ultimately undermine it if it doesn't live up to that promise. So in this case, happily, the product is amazing, and we have all of the framework we need to build a brand expression around it that is unique and different and lives up to the icon that it's become.
You've been at this for 127 years, you're fourth generation. How has the brand evolved over time?
Huge evolution. Remember, we go back to 1887. We invented the category of firefighters gear. My great-grandfather was one of the first to sort of sell clothing to New England firefighters that were going to go out into the cold at night, hence the term turnout gear. And it was really about keeping firefighters warm and dry. And then in the 1960s, the evolution of self-contained breathing apparatus caused fire department tactics to change dramatically. Now they're going into structures and actually getting to the seat of the fire and working those hazardous conditions.
Rob, what led to the relaunch and the new tagline in 2012?
Athletic gear for firefighters really is synonymous with how firefighters think of themselves. Our brand equity begins at the customer level. It really is about the voice of the customer approach that we go out and interview at all levels of the fire service. I've been a firefighter personally for 31 years. That's the authenticity that comes from the ownership and our perspective and our brand that ultimately is the face of the company to the industry. The work that they do is rigorous. It's much more akin to what an athlete endures as they go into doesn't matter if it's a football game or a basketball game. They start out at ground zero. Some of them sometimes are waking up in the middle of the night. They get an adrenaline rush. They're on the fire truck. They're getting dressed. They're putting on their gear. And they're thinking about what they're going to grab for tools when they get to the scene and charge into a building. So when we call it athletic gear for firefighters, it's that movement. It's what the body endures. That's why firefighters work out so much and train so hard, because they really are athletes. So the tagline, athletic gear for firefighters, really is synonymous with the job that they're doing.
Don, what's in store for the next 100 years for your clients?
We love the position that we've created, and we think that there's a lot of longevity to it. One of the great things about this particular brand is it's very forward-thinking. There's a lot of stuff on the horizon, next generation gear equipment to further, aid the cause when it comes to firefighters, and so we'll continue to manage and evolve the brand as those new opportunities appear. But we love the position and we love the opportunity that it affords us in terms of continuing to evolve.
Rob Fries, Don Fibick of Kemp Goldberg Partners, thank you very much for hosting us here in Pittsfield, New Hampshire. On our next episode, we'll continue to look at logos and marketing, going into the field and talking with entrepreneurs about the hows, whens, and whys of brand development.